Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted. I'm your host, Sean Falconer, and today I'm joined by Ori Rafael, CEO and co-founder of Upsolver, and we'll be discussing the data lakehouse. Ori, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Well, let's start off with an introduction. Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Upsolver, the startup in the big data space, helping companies to build and manage data lakes. And I'm a data guy, databases, data integration, machine learning, so all around.
So how did that journey start? Like, how long have you been working on Upsolver, and what sort of possessed you to actually start a company versus maybe go work on big data problems at another company?
So I actually started Upsolver by working on a big data problem that was more in the advertising space. That was the first 2.5 years of Upsolver. And we were trying to show you the right ad at the right time for the right price. Like, it's a problem that carries a lot of data that forces us to use a data lake. And I remember talking to my partner and really complaining about the fact that we've been trying to hire a data engineer, didn't find that person. Eventually, when we find that person takes 30 days to do something that I would do in 3 hours in SQL because I came from the databases world. That was a huge pain. We couldn't really iterate as a business. So we started building tools to basically use the data lake as if it was a database. And that was the technical mission statement when we started to make our data analysts, data scientists productive, developers as well. And our team comes from data infrastructure background. And at some point, we just fell in love with that problem more than we did in advertising. We decided to pivot to basically restart Upsolver. And we started selling in 2018 based on those tools that we basically made into a cloud offering.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that's a trend that we're starting to see in the industry in general. Is in order to really take advantage of something like a data lake, you have to open it up in a way that people can use it using SQL or other means that they're used to, like basically data analysts and so forth are these tools of the trade that they've been using for decades and decades.
Yeah, makes sense. It's always been very hard. Data lake has always been open. But the question is open in what way? So, for example, I, as Ori, as Upsolver, building data lakes, there wasn't a spec that I was exactly supposed to fulfill. Every data lake looks a little different according to which vendor you work with or according to the open source stack and how that was used in different companies. I think the change we're seeing today is that there is a spec on how you're supposed to build a data lake to make it more like a database. And that really accelerates that movement into what people call the lakehouse.
Yeah, and I think it's taken a long time to get there. Relatively speaking, like if you look at something like a warehouse database, those technologies have really been around in some form or fashion since the 1970s. We have 50 plus years essentially, building and iterating on those technologies. The data lake is less mature, and it's also taken a while for that essentially standardization to happen. But maybe before we get too much into the weeds of the world of data lakes, I want to take a step back too, just for the audience, maybe set some context around even the basics of what is a data lake, what's it solve, and how is it different even than some of these other technologies that we're talking about, like a conventional database or a warehouse?
Sure. So I think, first you had a database. That's an OLTP database, the database for your app, your transactions, and that falls short as an analytics database. For an analytic database, I don't want to query a single record. I want to basically aggregate the columns and understand trends. So the columnar data warehouse was created. I think it was called the EDW, the Enterprise Data Warehouse. And the idea there is that storage is columnar instead of by record. I think the next evolution of that was cloud hosted. So, for example, Amazon Redshift gave you the option to take that database that was a real pain to manage on-premise and now just have it in the cloud. But did that really get rid of the DBA type of problems? They still needed to increase storage, scale my cluster, so all the operations were still there, but I didn't own the server. That was jump number one. I think jump number two came with Snowflake, with the BigQuery basically decoupling. So let's decouple compute and storage. The vendor does that internally, but you as the customer, you're getting the benefits. You have less maintenance. The database is more scalable and easier to manage. Still very expensive. Still locking you into a single vendor. So for example, if I'm doing BI today with Snowflake and I love it, my data is locked in Snowflake. I want to do AI with another platform because I think what Snowflake has isn't my first choice. I can't really do that. We start replicating the data out. And I think right now we are going into Gen 4, so after EDW hosted and decoupled, we're basically moving into the idea of open table storage. So basically, you as the customer are implementing the same decoupling that Snowflake did. So I'm going to build my storage, my table, and then I'm going to choose the query engine. Listen, I don't call it warehouse at that point, but more of the query engine to run my queries on. But today I'm using A, tomorrow I can use B, I can use whatever I want. I can mix and match workloads as much as I want. So I think that's basically benefit number one. Benefit number one is that everything is open, I can use best of breed. Benefit number two is that suddenly costs are going down because now the data warehouses, query engines, they don't have a locking on you. Like you can replace them tomorrow by just running another engine on the data that you own. Those are, I think, the two big things you're getting out of that revolution of open table formats.
Yeah, and I think as I've talked to large sort of enterprise customers in the space, like that is a direction that they're really interested in moving towards. Is like, let's take advantage of essentially the cheap storage that exists in like S3, the insane reliability that you get there, and then attach something like Apache Iceberg on top of that to then become a platform agnostic in terms of where we're going to run compute, whether it's a Databricks, a Snowflake, or something else.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
What had to happen in order to get to a place where these open formats have the performance necessary in order to be able to have essentially this setup where you're keeping storage maybe maintained in a different system than tying it directly to the compute engine?
The open table formats give you a spec of what's a table on top of an S3. That's what they give you. They don't necessarily give you the performance. So Iceberg and Delta on its own don't necessarily give you the performance. They give you the preparation for performance. So now who can take advantage of those performance? You have the writers and you have the readers. So your queries and maybe your ingestion ETL or whatever. So how are you going to actually utilize those benefits? So for a good example would be, how are you actually going to manage your file system? Snowflake or any other data warehouse company has built a lot of IP around how to manage a file system, so you're going to get the best performance. When I started as a DVA, the first thing they gave me is an 800-page book of Oracle internals and how it looks. It was really a fun read, definitely, but still applies today. So now you are, Mr. Mrs. Customer, responsible for managing a file system. That's, of course, a lot in order to really get the performance. And platforms, for example, Upsolver, one thing we give you is we manage your file system for that performance. Snowflake has Snowflake Iceberg managed tables. They will do that for you. So the different vendors that are offering queries are also trying to give you the tools to manage your file system. And I think that would be a good example of how you're going to get the performance. I think it's still considered. I've been doing this for 7 years on top of Lake. I think that's a little unusual. Most of the products around Iceberg management have been born in recent years. And you ask, like, why now? Why now is the fact that Snowflake allows this, and BigQuery and Redshift. So the fact that warehouses are going to support an external table of data that you manage, it just didn't give you the option at the time. So I think that revolution maybe started with Databricks that had Delta and supported Delta because they were also used to query, so they could promote the idea of an open table format. That created a lot of pressure on Snowflake because they were a closed garden platform. So now Snowflake said, well, I'm not going to support Delta Databricks thing where only Databricks plays well. I'm going to support something that's really community adapted. And there was a project that was born in Netflix called Iceberg that a lot of big companies were supporting. So they decided to make a bet on Iceberg. And I think after them, the entire ecosystem, just choose a company and I can say yes. If they support Iceberg, every one of them will support Iceberg. So now you actually have the power to do that. So in the past, when we built lakes, we could only go support it from query engines like Trino, not like the big warehouses. Today, the very fact that they support it means that it's possible. So everything that we're talking about was just irrelevant 2 years ago.
How does the Delta format compare to Iceberg?
Well, there are a lot of, I think that in the feature details, I think it gets confusing really fast. There are small differences. I think the main thing is maybe who controls it. So in the past, Databricks were controlling Delta, and you only got good performance out of it if you're really using Databricks. So it was very tied just to Databricks, and that caused the rise of Iceberg, where now everyone are supporting Iceberg in a good way. Then Databricks bought Tabular, which is the Iceberg company, but it seems like they want to continue keeping it as a community thing and not just lose to Iceberg. It's better to own Iceberg and just lose to Iceberg. But the trend, from where I experienced it, was Delta was just being left behind compared to Iceberg, and only Databricks customers that made an investment in Delta were really interested in Delta. So I think Iceberg is the obvious winner of the open table format war.
Yeah, it seems that way. It was a short-lived battle, but it seems like Iceberg's winning. In terms of setting up something like Iceberg to use with my lake, like what are some of the systems I have in place? So you mentioned, besides essentially you have these open formats that tell you how to sort of structure the tables, but then you also need to set up essentially like a file system, and you can use things built into Snowflake to do that. You can use things that exist in Upsolver to also help you do that. What are some of the other core components that you need in order to actually set up a lake and use it?
Yeah, so a lakehouse is a broken like a database that's torn apart into different pieces. One piece is storage. So you own the storage. For example, if you work with Snowflake, storage was on the Snowflake side. S3 is a component that you're going to own. It's going to be in your cloud account. Next level is Iceberg. Iceberg is still it's not a server. It's still type of file system on S3. So we're still left with S3. On top of that, there is the catalog. The catalog has really been in the headline for the last few months with Snowflake releasing Polaris and Delta to open source and Databricks releasing Unity. And I think that the catalog wars are just starting out. The idea is for a catalog is for you to be able to find your table. So for example, today I'm working with Snowflake, I'm creating a table, but tomorrow I want to query that table with the Databricks. How can I do that? Well, if Databricks will support Polaris, they will be able to also query the table, and Snowflake will be able to maybe sell you a managed version of that catalog with additional permissions, or additional enterprise security type of stuff. So the catalog is another piece. The next piece would be something I think I saw Snowflake call them the Iceberg managers. So the person that's managing your file system, that could be Snowflake themselves or another vendor, or for example, Upsolver is right now the only independent company that serves as when I say independent, like startup independent, that's managing Iceberg for you. There's another company called OneHouse that's doing it for another format called UDI. Tabular were also doing this before they were acquired by Databricks. So Iceberg Manager is another piece, making sure that your storage is efficient and that you're able to get good performance when you query the data. And the last piece is the query layer, where you're going to use the warehouses, the query engines, whatever you want to use. So those are the different pieces. How hard is it to get started? Well, let's say you're using the cloud. You already have an S3. An Iceberg catalog is something that you can get, the spin up one, host it on your own server, or use one of the managed versions. We just saw Snowflake releasing a managed version that you can use. Iceberg Manager, choose your vendor, and compute engine, probably you're going to find yourself using multiple. That's a typical architecture that I would say.
Mm-hmm. And then what is the advantage of using Upsolver in this? Does that help keep some of this, again, sort of platform agnostic from being tied to one of the big, warehouse vendors?
So Upsolver has doing basically everything for Iceberg except querying it. So we are not a query engine. You want to go query your data, we're not the vendor for you. We are going to be serving as an Iceberg manager and also as an ETL vendor with focus on Iceberg. So for example, if I'm going to talk on the ETL capabilities, we'll help you bring data from Kafka or from a database using CDC or from object storage to create your tables. And we'll allow you to also read from those tables as if they were a stream, not querying it, but basically stream it to create a full pipeline. On the Iceberg management stuff, we basically manage the file system. All you do is write one line out of the create table, optimize true. And from that point on, you manage that table with Upsolver. That's regardless of what you use for ETL. So you don't use Upsolver for ETL. You can use whatever you want for ETL, only use us for the management. Why use us for the management? We are the most experienced in the market for that problem. We've been doing it for 7 years. We recently benchmarked ourselves versus Snowflake, AWS, and Tabular, we get better storage efficiency compared to everyone. So for example, compared to Snowflake, it was less than 50% the storage Snowflake required for Iceberg management. And we get the best query performance. I think compared to Snowflake, it was 72% better than what Snowflake got. And we even managed to get the performance to be that good that the query on top of Iceberg performed as well as queries on top of Snowflake native storage. So there's no trade-off of moving into Iceberg. The last thing that we're doing, and I think we are the only one doing right now, is that we support high velocity updates into Iceberg. That's something that Iceberg has always been criticized, and the real existing of Apache Hudi is because Iceberg is not good enough for streaming. We changed that. So we help you update Iceberg tables. For example, you're doing CDC from a database. All you have is update delete command. We'll ensure that the table is actually going to work with good query performance. And Snowflake doesn't support it today. AWS doesn't support it today. Tabular, we tried, it didn't work. So kind of out of all the options that I know, the only company that supports what's technically called merge on read upserts into Iceberg is Upsolver, and we do it using our management piece. So there are a lot of small files are created as a result of those updates and deletes, and we know how to work with them. Most of the vendors that we see today are more focused on append-only type of use case or slow batch workloads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you see more companies sort of moving to requiring essentially the upsert operation versus the doing batch or just append?
Yes, absolutely yes. By the way, I just talked to a big public SaaS company that they're in the Iceberg committers team, and they have a CDC workload, and they want to make that work on top of Iceberg, and they try to go more streaming than batch compared to what they did in the past. Don't have a technical solution for that right now. And basically CDC is maybe the number one most common use case today in the warehouse, and CDC is update and deletes. Mm-hmm. Like so if you want to do it with small intervals, you need us. If you want to do it in long intervals, you'll probably work with what's out there. I think we just made a bet that a certain architecture will work while others didn't think it will work, and we're able to solve the upsert problem better than anyone else. We'll see what happens next year. This is a market.
How is, when we think about ETL for like the Lakehouse versus a traditional warehouse, is there substantial differences?
There are some. So first of all, well, maybe there is one big difference, and I think that's the number one incentive for most of the companies that you talk to today that want to move to Iceberg, and that's you can do ETL without having to spin up warehouse clusters. So one of the biggest costs of ETL is that I need the warehouse to listen to all my commands while I'm writing data into it. But when I'm writing into S3, I can just write into S3. I don't have additional costs, and I don't have to pay for expensive warehouses clusters while I'm doing the ETL. So that's like a huge, huge advantage that Iceberg has in cost reduction. Some of the customers that I have will tell you that that's more than 50% of their cost, ETL workload on top of the warehouse. So I think Iceberg gives you the ability to get free of that, which is huge.
Yeah. So as I'm dumping data through ETL into S3, even if I have essentially the Iceberg table set up, I have catalog set up, is there additional updates that I need to make in order for the query engine to be aware of those new files?
So you need to register. The query engine discovers your data through the catalog. So you need to update the catalog. So every time for example, I write a Concave file into S3, I need to go update the Iceberg manifest, which is basically another file on top of S3. And I need to and then the catalog can discover that, and basically the query engine will be able to query the data. So you don't need Snowflake cluster up, but you do need to communicate with the catalog all the time.
Right. But that's a much cheaper update than spinning up a warehouse cluster.
It's just the catalog that's up all the time. You don't need to spin up a cluster.
Right. In terms of building lakes, and especially using some of these new technologies, the open formats, table formats, and so forth, like what are some of the challenges that people run into
with open formats in general? I think
with basically spinning up a lake and maintaining it and keeping it going.
I think the Iceberg management piece is a real hurdle today. Like anyone can write Iceberg. The question is how is it going to look on the other end when I'm going to query it. So the Iceberg management piece, of course, we are a vendor that's doing that. That's of course what I'm hearing a little more. But I can tell you, it's a big challenge for companies that decide to take on that task. Other than that, I think they're a little confused around what they're going to do with governance and catalogs, and the fact that 2 catalogs were open source recently, and like, what am I actually going to use? How is governance going to be? That's a question that's being answered quickly, but it's still early. So governance is definitely a concern for those companies.
In terms of the governance piece, like what is the hurdle that people are running into there?
What's the catalog that I'm going to use that's going to give me the best interoperability, because I don't want to be locked again? Answering that question for an enterprise takes time. Then there is role-based access control. So for example, Polaris is going to give you access control to your catalog and table, but it's not doing fine-grained access control, for example, row and column. How are you going to do that? You're going to use on Snowflake, there is another layer called Horizon, which is Snowflake Enterprise Security. So if you decide to go down that route, that's another commitment that you need to do, and it's sort of an additional lock-in. But more and more security, or maybe fine-grained access control, is going to be open source. I think companies strive to get to a point where data, metadata, and security policies are all open source. That's what the customers most want. Right now, we're in the beginning of that journey. Some of them they'll need to buy from enterprises. Some of them they'll need to maybe influence open source until that happens. But we are not at that nirvana point yet on the security side. On metadata and data, we're completely there.
Yeah, is there any open source security policy projects out there that you are aware of?
There are, but I would say that Polaris includes role-based access control on the table and catalog side. So that's already open source. On the fine-grained access control, I've seen stuff, for the Hadoop environment. I think there's something called Apache Ranger and those type of things. But I don't think that what's important is what Polaris and Unity and maybe Glue Catalog, what are those platforms going to support? So the fact that there is some open source, finding access control is not a difficult engineering problem. The question is who is going to solve it in a way that everyone agrees on. That's the real challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then if I'm using Upsolver to help me do some of this work, like what are some of the low-level details that I need to know and manage, or versus what is abstracted away from me?
Well, that's counter to what the value proposition is, which is, Iceberg in 5 minutes. Let's build a data lake in 5 minutes. That's the concept. You don't need to do a lot. Upsolver is a permission-based platform. So basically you need to give us permission to spin up clusters in your account. We don't have access to the data, but we can manage clusters remotely. And those clusters you define in a very short, command, 1 to 10 lines of code. What you want to do, if it's ingestion or management, and it just works out of the box. If you want to do it on open source, you have Spark, you have a bunch of platforms, and then it's all the overhead of data engineering and big data engineering with platforms like Spark.
So what's the deployment model essentially? Are you running like a control plane that for the managed service within your cloud environment, and then you're running essentially these clusters within, say, my cloud environment that allow you to remotely manage the data without touching it?
Yes, we also put an API server in your account, and that API server and maybe the other processing server, they're the one that get access to your S3, to your data. But I don't get access as a vendor to that S3, and I also don't have access to the actual servers. I just can spin them up and down. So basically that blocks the Upsolver employee from having access to customer data. So we will not become a data processor, what's called in the GDPR CCPA type of language. So that's the model. It's very similar to what Databricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of where the data lake is going, so we've talked a lot about the shift that we're seeing. A lot of people are seeing in the industry to move towards relying on a storage medium like S3 to decouple storage not only from compute, but actually from the people who control compute, like the Snowflakes of the world and so forth. But what are some of the other trends that you see in the world of data lakes that over the next couple of years, do you think the future might look like?
Other than open table format, what are the additional trends? So I think that one is catalogs, and the question that's a market that even I'm asking myself, like, where is it going to land? Because we've also seen a lot of interest in business catalogs, so it helped me organize what's going on with my data, organize access control. Like, all of those are management or control center type of requirements. I think we'll see some consolidation of maybe business catalogs becoming technical catalogs or vice versa. So that's definitely a potential trend. I think the second trend is making this, this infrastructure more friendly for AI. Like, everything has always been built for BI, but now that you want to do AI, for example, an AI system doesn't want to use SQL to bring their data. So, like, one of the services that we offer is the ability to do CDC, to capture a stream from Iceberg, so be able to feed it into an AI system. So that's the type of features that I think that we will see to making Iceberg and Lakehouse more friendly for AI.
So beyond just the sort of egress point from Iceberg to AI to feed it with training data, do you also see an opportunity for AI to sort of insert itself earlier in the life cycle of actually helping with the management and mapping of the data that's in the lakes to the catalog and the table formats?
There is one huge opportunity. I actually been pitched. Someone pitched me a startup with that exact. So I think your mind is on a real problem. Data modeling is one of the most time-consuming and hard problems in data. Eventually, I need to take the source data that's more chaotic and make it into something structured. So from that something structured, I'll be able to answer my reports. Now, those reports, people rely on them. So you can't hallucinate in the world of AI with what you're doing with those reports. So I can let an AI system write SQL for me, but unless I really understand what's there, I can't really be accountable. So someone that will find a way to make data modeling easier by having, a data modeling copilot. So, those type of offering that will make data modeling simpler, that will be really valuable. Like, anywhere you can find a junior, in many cases, employee doing the work, that's an opportunity for AI to take over, or at least really assess. And I think data modeling, you have 1 billion analysts out there, all of them doing data modeling work, not necessarily they're going to do a better job than what an AI can do. At least, so I think that's an area where you're going to see a co-pilot offering making a change.
Also, I guess, like, even beyond whether it does a better job or not is the scalability too. So if you're dealing with, like, I don't know, like terabytes or even petabytes of data, it's going to be pretty hard for, individual, like a human to essentially do all those, all the modeling and mapping versus deploying some sort of AI service to do it.
Yes. As long as you can understand what the AI did and really understand, the edge cases of that. Let's say if you're going to give finance reports, that will not be, an AI pass-through. Like,
right.
There needs to be a human in the middle for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to depend on context of where you can fully automate versus something that's like semi-automated. Obviously, if you're dealing with, like, I don't know, something healthcare related, and you're trying to make determinations about someone's like what to give them from a prescription standpoint or something like that, you're going to want a human to be in the loop that's a domain expert. Or the other example that you gave around financial. But if we're looking at application data that is essentially inaccessible today because we have too much of it and we can't really do anything with it, but we can even get access to 80% of it with a relatively decent accuracy, suddenly that becomes high value.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said. I would say that I haven't seen, and I've seen a lot of data sets, I haven't seen a data set you can't really work through and find whatever you want. Like, that's not a reason. Maybe according not to your means at the moment, you can pay a lot, but eventually we are talking about the machine processing this data. So as long as the machine can process that data, you're supposed to be able to get to 100% of your data set. I've seen data sets with millions of events per second, and they get to the most granular level that you can imagine.
Great. Well, in terms of Upsolver, like, what's next for you guys? Like, what are you focused on?
We're focused on Iceberg. Like, this is an opportunity we've been waiting for quite a few years. Like, when Upsolver started, we were the best out there and managing data lakes, but eventually only someone using like an Amazon Athena or a Trino can really access that data. It didn't come to the master data warehouse. So we were kind of stuck in a smaller market. Now we are doing the exact same thing, but can go to a much bigger market. So I think step one was translating what we did into Iceberg. Our Iceberg management piece is pretty, I would say, pretty mature. We are going to continue evolving that, and we are going to go further into catalog capabilities. But I can't really break that down, but I think there are a lot of opportunities being created as a result of the new catalogs and the catalogs being open sourced.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like, given your background and interest in the lake, you're sort of fortunately like really early, I guess, like believers in the trends that you were seeing. And now it's over the last 2 years, there's just been such an explosion in interest around these that you're very well positioned, I think, to sort of take advantage of the market momentum.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, nothing else. Feel free to, ask us questions from the Slack channel or from the website or from one of the events. I wanted to talk about our event this Thursday, which is an Iceberg community event. It's the second one we are doing. The first one was a huge success, but you can probably catch the recording. It's called Chill Data Summit. It's an all Iceberg community event. You're going to see a lot of the people from the Iceberg community speaking there.
Well, fantastic. Well, Ori, thanks so much for being here.
All right. Thank you very much, Sean.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.